What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 81 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where, sorry, I almost said two buds, because Max is out this week. He's feeling sick, wish him well. From different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I wasn't on it last week. You had a good question block-filled show, but
this week is
now we got no rooms for questions.
Exact inverse, right? Yeah, it's like this is nothing but news this week. But you know what? That's all right. You know, it's fun to bounce back and forth because we did get some really good questions for the question block this week. So I guess we'll just have to do another grab bag on the show next week, unless just as much stuff happens. We'll see how it plays out. But we've got a lot to talk about this week, including a follow-up on a conversation we've had previously about the Xbox Series S potentially holding back the generation, or at least holding back the Xbox generation. Paradox Interactive had a couple really big announcements we're excited to talk about, including Cities and Skylines II and Life by You, which is a seemingly a spiritual successor to The Sims. Very exciting. We got some conversation around IO Interactive's next game, a Square Enix rock block. It's nuts. It's news all the way down this week. So let's just get into it. Following up on the Series S of it all, it was back in the headlines again this week, unfortunately, with the news that Baldur's Gate 3 is not exclusive to PS5, according to Larian, the developers of the game. But the Xbox version has run into technical issues, and that's why it won't be launching. Crazy.
Yeah, we had the announcement, right? Baldur's Gate at the PlayStation event a couple of weeks ago. Me and Max spoke about it, and at the end of that, it went up on their Twitter account, and it only had the PS5 logo, and there was a lot of speculation that they've gone down the exclusivity route with Sony, and we even spoke about it on the podcast that it looked like it was going to be exclusive, but they went to their Reddit subreddit and clarified it, and put out a statement saying that they've had an Xbox version of Baldur's Gate 3 in development for some time. We've run into some technical issues in developing the Xbox port that have stopped us feeling 100% confident in announcing it until we're certain we found the right solutions. Specifically, we've been unable to get split-screen co-op to work to the same standard on Xbox Series X and S, which is a requirement for us to ship.
Which echoes some of what we heard when we brought this up a couple, months ago now, I guess, on the podcast, where there were a few developers who had expressed this concern that the console was just not, it's fine for what it is, right? But it's not a truly next-gen console in the way that the Series X and the PS5 are, and to expect games to be able to, run with some level of parity across them is probably an unreasonable ask, and even if it's possible, it's probably cost prohibitive.
Yeah, so I think that was around the Gotham Knights release, right? We had that discussion from the developer that was talking on Twitter about it, and obviously that game came out with a number of problems even on PC and on Xbox Series X and on PS5. So I think people kind of took that with a grain of salt. It was like, the game came out and it was still a bit of a mess anyway, so can we kind of believe that? But this time around, it's different. It's not that it's just graphical parity and that we can't get it running at 60 frames per second and it's only running in a 30 frame per second mode, which I think was the issue with Gotham Knights. This time it's an actual feature. It's the split screen co-op, which was a staple in their previous games, Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2, and they obviously want that to come here. Now, it's curious as to their wording, like the requirement for us to ship. I initially read it as like, it's kind of an internal requirement that they're looking for, but having thought about it, it seems like it's probably a requirement from Microsoft's side.
It is.
That they require it to be like a feature parity.
Yeah, it is. And that was, I think, as you said, right, I think a lot of people kind of took the comments from, and I forget the name of the developer at the time, because I believe it was a Rocksteady developer, actually, and not someone who even worked on Gotham Knights, and they were just kind of making commentary.
Oh, yeah, you might be right, yeah.
I'm a little hazy on the story because it's been a few months, but I recall him making that point, right? That it's like Xbox requires the games to be, equivalent essentially, right? You can't have like one of the examples that comes to mind for me is, right, I think back to the launch of the PS4 and Dragon Age Inquisition. When that came out, I remember there were several features that were removed from the game on the quote unquote last gen versions, right? As like a, hey, like this is the compromise for it to run on PS3 and Xbox 360. These different features or these different modes or whatever won't be supported, right? And it seems as though Xbox has kind of made the mandate that if you're releasing a game on Series X, it also needs to run on Series S, right? And needs to be, feature complete.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you
To
said,
some extent, yeah. Like we have seen them say you can have a 60 hertz mode on
right.
Xbox Series X or a 120 hertz mode, but you can run it at 30 frames per second.
But that's a lot
we even
different,
saw
right?
we even saw with Doom Eternal that it got a ray tracing mode on Series X, but it didn't on Series S. There's no ray tracing there. But those are all graphical things.
Right.
There's very much not there's a whole game mode that's not available. Like, can you imagine if, say, Hitman had released like Hitman Freelancer and it came to Series X, but it didn't come to Series S for whatever reason? I don't think they would have been able to do that.
And I think that is, I guess even a more recent example, right, is the Horizon DLC, which will be coming to PS5 but will not be coming to PS4. I think that they don't want that to be the case, right? Because they've sold the Series S as being
next gen.
Yeah, and as being equivalent, right? As like, oh, like they are essentially the same, right? Like they can play all the same games. It's just, one is more powerful, one runs better, it's faster, the frame rates are better, all that stuff, right? It's supposed to be a switch.
Well, initially it was
the
Series
situation.
S is. It was going to say initially the Series S is 1440p we're targeting, and then the Series X's we're targeting 4K. I don't actually think we've really seen many native 4K games on the Series X anyway, and it seems like the Series S mainly targets 1080p rather than 1440p, from at least from what most developers seem to be targeting. Maybe there's a little bit of dynamic resolution there that goes up to 1440p at most. I just think it's such a shame that the Xbox is seemingly missing out on a really hot game that's coming out this year, that's coming to a competing platform, that's coming to PC, that's coming to cloud solutions. Like they've spoken about it potentially coming to like the NVIDIA's cloud streaming service GeForce Now, but it's not able to come to Xbox because Series S is potentially holding it back. And I don't know what the solution is there. Like, does Microsoft need to drop the requirements? But then does that open up like a can of worms where it's kind of free reign then for developers to just be like, okay, well, we're going to bin feature X, Y, and Z from the Series S version because it's too difficult for us to do and too cost prohibitive. And we're just going to release a game on Series X. And that's not a good solution for gamers who have bought into the next gen promise that the Series S has been sold to them on.
Yeah, I honestly, I think they've really put themselves in a corner. And I remember being less bullish on the Series S at launch. Like I remember, like when you and I were talking about it, you were like, I feel like this is like a real silver bullet for them, right? The fact that this thing is so cheap and it's basically the same price as a Switch, right? And you can get that really cheap entry point into the Xbox Live, or not Xbox Live, Xbox Game Pass ecosystem, as well as having like a quote unquote next gen console, as long as you don't care about 4K, which many people don't, right? And like you said, a lot of games don't even target 4K natively anyway. If you want to have a 60 FPS mode, you're playing in 1080p anyway, in a lot of cases anyway. So I think I remember kind of having that feeling of like, why would anyone buy this? Because you're going to hit a ceiling really quickly in terms of like the storage, and you're going to have to make a further investment in it. But now that you have this kind of like problem that has emerged, right? Like only a few years into the generation, I don't know what they do, because I think shy of offering some kind of upgrade system where they're like, we're going to discontinue the S and you can trade it in and get an X for, a little bit more money or whatever, which they're not going to do, right? And that's why I say, like, that's an outlandish thing. That would never happen.
The only solution I could see is them saying that it runs on Series S, but it's the cloud version, in the same way that Flight Sim runs on Xbox One, but it's the cloud version that runs on Xbox One.
Yeah.
And that would be a real shame if that's the case. Like, I don't want that to happen. I feel like maybe they just need to drop their requirements a little bit and say, not every mode needs to, or maybe it's a case by case basis. I don't know. And
But
they
I
have
think you're right though.
to
That
kind of,
opens such a can of worms marketing wise, right? Of like
yeah,
then every time they release a game, it's like, oh well, this is what the Series S version is like, and this is what the Series X version. It becomes a whole. It very much muddies the narrative that I think they've created for the Series S, right? Which is that
I agree
it's
with
just
you.
the
Yeah.
cheaper one.
Yeah, but I think the I guess the thing that the Series S had for them is it brought them into new markets, right? We heard when they had that presentation at the Tokyo Game Show that the majority of people in Japan had bought into the Series S because it was that cheaper entry price point, gets you onto Game Pass, it gets you into the Xbox ecosystem for like what, 249? And it is a really great price. And you look at the used market as well now, it's like you can get these so cheap, like under $200.
There was just a sale through Verizon that I remember Mango shared over in our Discord, and it was like if you were any kind of Verizon customer, you could buy one for like $150. It's like what the heck? Like
It's
they're
insane.
giving them
Absolutely
away.
insane. Yeah, and
That's cheaper than a
they
Switch.
usually get then 3 months of Game Pass for $1. They're always doing that. You've got essentially for the price of say two next gen games, you've got access to all of Game Pass and a console that you can go with. Even if you wanted to just buy a new Xbox controller, right? And then toss away the console, like sell the console but keep the controller. That's still a really good deal, $150. That's insane. But I really don't know what the solution is here. I really hope that Larian either decides to ship a version of Baldur's Gate that doesn't have split screen co-op, and they're just like, okay, we can't get that to work. It's got multiplayer online co-op,
I
and
just don't know
you can play it single player. But I really hope that they do release this game day and date with the other platforms because people have been really excited
I
about
mean,
this
they
game ever
won't
since
though,
it went
right?
into early access.
Like I don't. It's not going to come day and date based on this. The game's coming out soon.
Based on this, but that's like Larian's requirements, right? Is that they've been unable to get split screen co-op working, but you can take out split screen co-op and potentially then you can ship it.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they
But do
could
they
do
want
that.
to do they want to compromise on what they want to do? Like I don't know. That's their choice, really.
I think it's far more likely that they'll launch it on PS5 and then they will probably spend more development time getting an Xbox version running, which I think also really like that stinks. You know, like that's a really unfair situation that like Xbox is basically, you know, to have your game come out on Xbox, it has to work on both of these. So now like the cost is put onto Larian and other developers where their games are struggling to run on Series S to just make a whole second version of it, basically. That's not great. And I think if I was a developer of like mid-size like that, I would probably just eschew releasing your game on Xbox unless it was coming to Game Pass, right? Because I think that would be the smarter move then is release it as the move, right? I think for a lot of developers, I would think, right? If I was making the business decision is let's go to Sony and get a 1-year exclusive contract for it to release on PS5 first and PC. It's already on PC, right? So you still have a ton of players between you have the number one console platform and PC. That's a huge install base. And then you take 1-year exclusivity, let Sony do a ton of marketing for you because they can hang a hat on the fact that they have this exclusive third-party game while in a year where they have less first-party releases. Then when that year exclusivity is up, you've spent all that time working out the kinks trying to get it to work on Xbox, and then you go to Xbox and be like, all right, now let's negotiate a deal for it to be on Game Pass for a year.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be Final Fantasy's approach, right? We'll talk about Final Fantasy 16 later on, and that it's not going to be on PC, even though they've only got 6 months exclusivity with PlayStation 5. And I think that's the first time anyone's ever revealed that they've got a 6-month exclusivity deal with PlayStation. Yeah. Usually these deals are just like, yeah, we're exclusive, and they don't ever tell you that it's timed and it's going to come later. It's just this exclusive.
But when you think about it, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like Square did that to pretty good effect with Final Fantasy 15. If memory serves. It was like, I believe that the rollout was it came out on PS4 first as an exclusive, and it got a bunch of hype, and it was this big game that everybody paid attention to. It came out on Xbox, and then it came out on PC later. And if you were in one of those other ecosystems and you were interested in it, you had heard about it Maybe you get it when it comes to the new platform, right? Or when it comes to your preferred platform. And you get your game, past that kind of initial. That's a problem for a lot of single player games, right? It comes out, it gets the sales it's going to get, and then the only way to motivate people to get into it is to like put it on sale, right? Whereas if you release it on a new platform at a later date, it does kind of drum up new interest in it again and new conversation around it again. So I think with Xbox, like, I think that this could be a real problem for them with, unless they're willing to shell out to get the games on Game Pass or to get an exclusivity or whatever. Like, if it's just genuinely, or not even genuinely, generally tougher to release a game on Xbox because you have to work with 2 SKUs, whereas with PlayStation, you're only working on the one. Like, why would you spend extra money to make sure that you can launch on the 3rd most popular console? Not a great look for them.
I don't know what the solution is for Baldur's Gate 3 here. I hope that Larian find a way to release it in August 31st is when it's due for the 1.0 release. And they've said that they will announce other platforms. They're just not confident that they can hit that date yet, so they don't want to announce it. And it's like, okay, fair enough. And I respect that they didn't just announce that it's coming to Xbox and then we're just like, shit, we actually can't make it, and then have to backtrack on that, because that would have been really disappointing for fans as well. Or
this way, if they figure it out, they can be like, hey, it's coming. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. And then they look, they sort of look good. I think it was just the messaging and the announcement in Sony's presentation, and the fact that it only had the PlayStation 5 logo, it made people worried. And I can understand that, because I was one of them. I was really disappointed that it wasn't coming to Xbox. I think I'm probably going to end up, now that it's not coming to Xbox, picking this game up on Steam and playing it on my Steam Deck, because I think initially I was probably going to get it on Xbox and probably play through it with my brother.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. I was hoping to play it on Xbox as well, just because that's generally my go-to for third-party stuff these days. Like, unless there is like an advantage on PlayStation, like whether that's like a haptic interaction or it just runs better or whatever. So I guess I'll be playing it on PS5, unless I decide that I don't care about, because it's not like a super graphic intensive game. So if it does run well on Steam Deck, maybe I'll just pick it up over there so that we can play together, Oh, but it's going to have crossplay, isn't it? I feel like it has crossplay at launch, maybe.
Potentially. I don't know if they've announced that. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to have time to play this at launch, because I've got Diablo 4 coming out, like, just, I think it's a month prior to this. And it's just like, I'm going to be deep into Diablo. Resident Evil 4 is coming out at the end of this month. There's a lot of games coming. And who knows when, like, the next game we're going to talk about, City Skylines 2, is going to come, because that's somehow coming in 2023, and no one saw it coming at all.
I'm sorry, you just gave me a perfect transition, and I'm not going to lie to you. I was trying to read if Baldur's Gate 3 was crossplay, so that's on me. That's on me, man. I'm not going to sit here and try to lie to you. But yeah, so Cities and Skylines, that's where you got us to. Is that correct?
Yeah, Cities Skylines 2.
Cities
coming.
Skylines.
We had an announcement. Yeah, we had an announcement yesterday, as of time of recording, that it's coming. Surprise announcement at Paradox's kind of little update that they do. I can't remember what they call it. It's got new tools to build any kind of city that you can imagine, and follow its growth from a humble village to a bustling metropolis. Fully realized transport and economy systems, and a wealth of construction and customization options. And they've said it's going to have advanced modding support at release, which I don't think City Skylines did. I think modding got added later,
that's
which is
actually
nice.
really cool.
So we'll be able to have the mods built in. And it looks like there's from the announcement trailer, it looks like there's a lot more of a focus on traffic and roads and like construction like that, which I really like. I like the transport aspect of it. Me and my partner sometimes watch like videos of people kind of making advanced traffic systems in Skylines. It's really realistic. It's quite cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing more about this. I don't think anyone saw a sequel coming for this game, because it's still had such support from Paradox and from just DLC after DLC after DLC for this game. But it's one of those games that is doing exactly what you said. It's coming to Game Pass day one. So I would imagine they got a big chunk of cash from Microsoft to bring this to Game Pass. Now that is a win for Microsoft, because this is a huge game, and not only is it Game Pass on Xbox, it's Game Pass on PC too. So
that's nice.
It potentially gets people to subscribe and download it on PC.
Yeah, that's very cool. They've been doing a pretty good job of that anyway. Like they just got Age of Empires 2, the remastered one is on there, and they were both day and date. I think on both platforms as well, which was cool. I haven't got a chance to play it yet, but I
Yeah,
heard
it's
it's really good.
nice. Mythology's coming, which I know is
I
your
know.
it's your one.
I'm so excited. I'm excited about this too, though. Like, I am a big fan of this type of game. They're definitely something I played a lot when I was younger, and every once in a while, I'll boot one up and it'll like really get its hooks in me. It's been a while though, you know. Like, I think the last time I really got into a game like this heavily was probably like back in college. You know, it's been some time. And I always was interested in City Skylines, but I just never quite took the plunge. So I feel like obviously it being a game that was like still supported and everything, like I always could have, but I kind of like this being like a fresh jumping on point, you know?
Yeah, and it looks like the graphics are going to be phenomenal. I would recommend checking out Cities. I think it's on Game Pass. It might not be anymore, but I
I think it
think it is.
was.
Um, or you can buy the whole City Skylines collection for the bargain price of $225 on Steam. So if
That's pretty
you
good.
want to pick up all the
Pretty
DLC,
good, you know?
$225.
$225, not too bad. But you know what? I like maybe I will. Maybe I'll take the plunge, but I feel like I might run the risk of like that thing that I feel like we all do when a new game's coming out and you're like, let me go play the old one, and then you're like, I've kind of had my fill. I don't necessarily need the new one now.
Yeah, that's why I haven't done that with Breath of the Wild, because I was
Yeah,
like eager to play Breath of the
same.
Wild again, and I'm just like I'm not gonna go back and do that because I know when Tears of the Kingdom comes out, I'm gonna be fatigued by that style, and I really want to
I
play
want to be
it
hungry
and be
for it.
fresh and like enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
and
kind of
I
where I'm
am.
at with this.
But
So
there's so much coming out in the next few months. It's insane.
I know,
Like
dude.
honestly insane.
Even right now, there's like new stuff coming out, and I'm like struggling to keep up with it. You know, so I've been busy
Yeah,
myself anyway. But
Hitman Freelance has had its hooks in me. I've not stopped playing that game. I love it. That I think I'm gonna make an argument that that's one of my games of the year, even though it's a new mode to an old game. I'm making an argument that is going on my game of the year list.
I'm excited to have that conversation later because I feel like that is a conversation that is like worth having as games like continue to exist for
Yeah, because
years and years and years, right?
like imagine if you picked up the new Destiny DLC. Like, that essentially is a new game that's got
Yeah.
new story, it's got new modes, it's got new everything in there. I think you can make the argument that that is one of your favorite games of the year. Same with World of Warcraft DLC. It's like an ongoing game, but it's one of your favorite things you played.
I mean, at least we make our own rules here, so we can say whatever we want.
Yeah, I know the Steam Deck almost made it on the list this year.
I'm vetting yours next year. You're out here doing crazy shit. You came out, you're like, my number 10 game is a game that came out last year. I almost said a console. It's like, you're just cheating. I know you played real video games. You're like
Hey, Wordle deserved to be on the list, and if people haven't gone and listened to our Game of the Year discussion, I think it's worthwhile just for that. I think Wordle deserves to be on the list.
You're crazy, man, but I love you. So the other game that they announced is one I'm also very interested in. It's called Life by You. This is a new game from Rod Humble, who is the former head of The Sims and the CEO of Second Life studio Linden Labs. This is going to be the first game from a new studio at Paradox that's called Paradox Tectonic. And Humble said that their goal is to create open, fun, beautiful games which respect the player's intelligence and enables their creativity, freedom, emotion, and sharing. And then they also promised that there would be another event at the end of March 20th is going to be the next time we'll see more of Life by You. The first thing we saw was just a very short teaser. I'm playing it for you YouTube kids now. But I mean, it's The Sims,
Oh yeah, but
right?
there's enough in there to get you hungry for it. Especially
Yeah.
when it gets to, for me, it was like at the 20-second mark when it goes into showing the house plot and the build mode and like all of the tools you potentially got, and the fact that if this follows the developers lead with what they've done with cities and having like mod support at launch, can you imagine the shit you're gonna be able to build and create and decorate in this game? I'm so excited about that because the build mode for me was one of my favorite aspects of The Sims. I used to just cheat, get loads of money, and then
Oh
build
yeah,
my dream houses.
for sure. Yeah, you do a Rosebud, you know, and you just
Yeah.
out there and you start
And then
spamming.
like it were the comma, semicolon, comma, semicolon, you used to get loads of it. It
Yeah,
was great.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I I think this is very interesting because you talked about City Skylines, right? And like how it was such a big indie success and it was like a perfect you know, I think the most famous example of this is Stardew Valley, so I always want to say it's Stardew Valley'd this other thing, but obviously Stardew not the first to do it. I just think probably one of the best, and most recognizable examples. From now
Yeah,
on,
I
you know
think
what, Steve? I'm gonna coin the term.
cities came out. Cities came out first, right?
I think it did.
2015.
I think it did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but I'm gonna coin the term right now, and we're gonna call it the Stardew Valley effect. You know, it's the spiritual
Okay. Yeah,
successor,
yeah.
right? For a game that no longer is made by the original publisher or developer or what have you. Because like
Yeah, I
SimCity,
mean, in this case, The Sims, like they do still
they
make that
do.
game, and they recently went free to play, and they added like more inclusive options in there, which I thought was really cool, like scars and things.
That's
And I loved that, but this kind of got a bit stale. And I know people were a little bit disappointed with the latest packs that they put out, the latest DLC packs, and it was just like, oh, you get like a hair dryer and some new furniture, and you can give us like $10 for it. I kind of think people are hungry for shift back to what The Sims originally was, and going back to that more that like focus on a simpler gameplay.
I think that's what's so interesting about it, right? Is like with City Skylines, it was like SimCity, the last SimCity, right, came out and was, a very public misstep in a lot of ways, right? And it kind of fell into obscurity, right? And it was supposed to be this big comeback for that brand, and it just wasn't. And that left the door open for City Skylines to come in and be its own thing, right? And we've seen Planet Coaster do the same
Do you
thing, and
remember what
Planet
the very
Zoo, and
last Sim City was?
it
Because
was the
I remember it. I remember playing it.
yeah, it was the one that was always online, and it came out in like 2000.
Oh no, they did one after that that was a
Really?
mobile. It was a mobile only SimCity game,
Oh,
and it was horrendous,
okay.
absolutely fucking horrendous. It was free to play. It was dreadful. I absolutely hated it. Apparently, it was the most played SimCity game ever, which is not difficult when it's free and you
Yeah,
download it, right? And it
true.
has like pop-up ads all over the place. It was not great. Not a great
That's so
experience.
that's so disappointing. But I think it's interesting to see them kind of do this now with The Sims, like you said, which is definitely not a dead franchise, and like we know that there's still an active player base there. There is plans for another one. It's still a healthy series, but I think having like a fun new indie alternative to it is something that I think is going to be really interesting to see. And obviously, I think there's a lot of potential there, right? Not only just to like do something different or evolve the formula a little bit, but I mean like maybe to create some competition, right? And like push EA's team at Maxis and everything to is it still Maxis or is it a new studio now?
It is still Maxis.
Okay,
Yeah, it
yeah.
is. They resurrected it.
Um that'd be cool. It would be nice to see that. And who knows, right? Like maybe this is maybe Life by You could have its like Fortnite moment where it comes out and becomes the new Coke, right? And like is like, "Oh, this is the hot thing now." Like this is the cuz like there's so many people that play Stardew that like probably don't even know about Harvest Moon, right? Cuz
Oh,
Harvest
yeah,
it's
100%.
been
So many
dead for so
people, yeah.
long, right?
Yeah.
Like so, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm beyond excited about this game. Like it was just
Me too.
the fact that it's just a tiny little tease and like it feels like nobody's talking about it really. I think March 20th is going to be really exciting to see what they actually unveil because there's so many little tidbits in the trailer that just look so exciting from the build mode, from the relationships, from like the beach, the car, like going to work and stuff. There's a lot in here that just it brings back those memories of playing The Sims and The Sims 2 when I was a kid and absolutely falling in love with that game. And I know that I'm probably going to fall in love with this. And it makes me wonder if they can make City Skylines a success and they can make the kind of spiritual successor to The Sims with Life by You, like what else is kind of ripe for the picking for Paradox to kind of take over? Because it feels like they're kind of the masters of these kind of sim games, really.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I think it's an interesting question because I feel like a lot of the games that immediately spring to mind for me are ones that I feel like there already is something, right? Like thinking in this vein, right? Like I think of Roller Coaster Tycoon, Zoo Tycoon. Obviously, we have Planet Coaster, we have Planet Zoo there. They could always throw their hat in the ring, I guess, but um, they do a lot of like strategy, type games and stuff like that. I I don't know, like maybe like maybe like a return to like a proper a more traditional RTS. Like obviously we do have like the age stuff, but like I think of like what Blizzard used to do with stuff like Warcraft and StarCraft, and obviously StarCraft 2 still exists, but it's certainly not relevant in the way it used to be, and I think part of that is that gaming has kind of, like that genre is less popular than it used to be and less dominant than it used to be. But I also think that Blizzard just because of Activision Blizzard being the company that it is, and Blizzard being a part of this very, very huge bottom line profit motivated company where like they put out something like Crash and Spyro and Tony Hawk, and they're big successes critically, and they make a bunch of money, and they still close the studio down. Is there room for a
Yeah.
niche RTS like StarCraft to thrive there? Probably not. But at like a Paradox Interactive, where like that's their whole bread and butter, that might be the way. Like that might
I
be
could see that. It feels like the only other studio doing this kind of game is Relic, the
yeah.
creator of Company Heroes, that did Age of Empires 4. If they've got they were the ones making those like Warhammer 40K games. So I wonder if potentially they could resurrect it. Maybe Paradox. I know they've got Surviving Mars. They published that game. Potentially they could do something like a StarCraft, which would be really cool. But I love those kind of base building games and stuff like Tropico, things like that. I've
Me
always really
too.
enjoyed those. Um, and I love The Sims. So the fact that they kind of have two of those coming out with City Skylines and Life by You is just, yeah, really exciting to see. And who knows when Life by You is coming out, but the fact that we're getting a new City Skylines in 2023 and it's coming to Game Pass day and date, that's a real win for me.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for fans of the genre. I think there's obviously been a bit of a lull there for a while, and like you get the odd, something like Tropico that does still come out and really hit, but you don't get them as much as you used to. So definitely a cool to see some more stuff like this. And I think Life by You is something that could really be disruptive in an interesting way. I hate to use that term that way, but it could be, this could be an opportunity to take a shot at the king, which is always exciting. All right, so we got some more stuff to talk about in a minute, but before that, let me remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of February. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Asobi, Wakahula, Snackago, and Ty the Dude. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go become a Patreon producer or find a link to one of those sister shows that I just mentioned, make sure you head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find all the places that we are all over the web, all the ways that you can get involved, show your support right into the show. However you choose to do so, we appreciate you tuning into this week's episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. Steve, this next one I'm going to throw to you because IO Interactive has a new game in development currently called Project Fantasy. Doubt that's the final name. They have thrown out the bat
I
signal
hope not.
looking for new talent on this game. You are obviously a huge IO Interactive fan. You just talked about how you're going to lobby for a Hitman DLC to be one of your games of the year. So hit me with this. What's the news? How excited are you about it?
Oh, I'm through the roof excited about it. It's a real departure from them because obviously they've worked on Hitman now for over a decade. And we know that they're
Wow.
working on on a James Bond game. So that's probably going to be pretty similar in style to a Hitman. It's James Bond with guns and you go around shooting. But the fact that they're now shifting and building something fresh, something new, they said that they are now sharing with all of you that we're embarking on a new adventure, one that expands our creativity, our capabilities, and in some sense, our identity. We're building a new world, a new IP, and an online fantasy RPG. Whether that remains to be seen what they mean by an online fantasy RPG, whether this is like an MMO style thing, whether this is like party based. We obviously don't know very much at the moment. They shared a little bit of concept art, which looks really, really cool. It looks like it follows some of the typical kind of D&D style characters that you come to know and love.
Oh,
But they're
yeah.
hiring for
But
everyone,
there's
right?
also a mount that's a freaking elephant, so I'm in.
It looks really, really cool. And I'm excited just to kind of see where it goes. I think this is probably like a 2025, 2026 game at the earliest.
Yeah,
I
I mean, the
would
fact that
imagine we've probably got James Bond first and then
yeah,
moving on to this.
yeah, I would be surprised if we saw this even close to before then, especially if it is like an online kind of game. Like you suggested, those kinds of games take a long time to develop. You know, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if maybe this is further out. And again, the only reason we're hearing about it so early is because they need talent. But that's fine. You know, like
Yeah, that was the same reason that they announced Project 007. It was the same deal. IO Interactive is currently recruiting elite talent from around the world, is what they said when they announced Project 007. So they want people to come and work there. And that's a trend that we've seen all over, right? We saw Rare doing it for their new game. We saw Blizzard doing it for a new game over there, a new IP over there. I think we've seen Bungie do it. There's a lot of people doing this. I think even Retro Studios were kind of advertising and saying, "Come and work on something fresh," or maybe it was Monolith. Um, and nobody can seemingly get people to come and work for them. I don't know why. I don't know why there's such a shortage of talent in the industry, and what can be done to solve it.
I mean, you know, there's a lot of factors at play, right? Like, I mean, I think I don't want to get too morbid or dark or anything, right? But I mean, there is the reality that a lot of people have died in the last several years, right? Some of them are game developers, so that doesn't help. But I also think like going into a recession, people are less likely to, I think, enter fields that they see as volatile. And Jason Schreier wrote an entire book about how volatile the games industry is. It's tough to survive in game dev. And, I know we've talked a lot about how a lot of the people that are in game development, like you're in it because of passion, right? And because you love making art, right? You want to be an artist. So many of them could leave and go to a Silicon Valley company and make a lot more money and have more job stability. And a lot of them do. And I think going into a recession, you're probably going to see more likelihood of that as we see layoffs and things like that, that you will see people who are like, well, forget it then. If the industry doesn't want me, right, or then I'm not going to fight to be a part of it. And I think what you hope, right, the answer is to your question is you see more flexibility, you see better pay, you see more work from home opportunities. I think the industry needs to evolve the way that it pays people. And I think for some of these companies, that's going to mean paying your CEOs and your C-level executives a little less than their bonus and, like not worrying about status in that way. Because I don't think that the video game industry is really supports that all that well. Because games are not as volatile as a lot of other entertainment industries, like when it comes to, recession and things like that, right? Like people still buy video games because they're a pretty good ROI. But, it's at some point, like games are getting more and more expensive to produce and you can't charge more for them. So at some point, something's got to give. And if that is profit margins for, the Bobby Kodaks of the world, right? Like, okay, like I don't know that we need them in game dev, honestly. Like, we don't need to attract these huge, C-level executives with these huge status symbol payments.
Microsoft's working on wiping them all out just by buying everyone.
Right.
And then they've just got Phil Spencer at the top and that's it.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's Todd Howard's there as well, but at least he kind of feels a bit different to Bobby, right? He's kind of actually in the weeds making games. At least it feels like anyway.
I think it's
How
always.
true that is, I don't know.
I agree. I think it's always important to not get sucked into like the idea of corporate heroes, right? Like Phil Spencer is a businessman. He's not an artist. He's not a game developer. But I believe that he is a gamer. He plays games and he likes games and he gives a shit about the health of video games as an industry because he engages with the art form, right? And I think that I believe that that's different. I really do. You know, I think that there is a big difference between being somebody who is involved in the industry because you love it, and even if you're like, I think of even somebody like Reggie, right? Like Reggie was not a game developer, he was not an artist, but he loved video games and he loved playing Nintendo games before he worked there. And I think that that does make a difference, like in the way that you treat IP, and the way that you treat people that make games, and the way that you think about the industry and the culture of video games, because you're a part of it, right? And that obviously you're going to have a different relationship to it than somebody who's just there because this was the next move on their trajectory as a CEO, and what they're passionate about is business and making money. And obviously I'm not a fan of that, but even, you know, like if that's what your bag is, fine, but I don't want you running an art house. Like that's what video game publishers are supposed to be, you know? At least in my opinion.
Yeah. The Electronic Arts.
Yeah, there you go. But I mean, again, right? I think all of the changes we've seen at EA over the last couple of years have been as game developers have become the C executives, right? It's been when Vince Zampella got a spot on the board is when you saw changes. And that's because he's a fucking game developer.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I know it started by people making games, and then obviously Trip left to go and make the 3DO, which was not great. So I feel like
Rip.
even game devs can fall from
Oh
graces.
yeah, of course. I'm not sitting here saying that they're all, you know, perfect angels or whatever, but I think that's a better baseline than somebody who became the head of a company because that was the best option they had to make another $1 million or $1 billion, right? Like that's just, you know, that's just one man's opinion.
Yeah, I was reading how Bobby became CEO of Activision. He became CEO of Activision in 1991 because he purchased a company stake the previous year. That was it. He had money, so he bought himself the seat.
It's like that's not great. You know, I think there's a wide berth between him and a Phil Spencer, or like him and like, you know, a better example of like, you know, probably like a Satoru Iwata, right? Who was a actual programmer before he was he was in the trenches making games, right? So like he knows what that means. He knows what it means to cut people. I think that does make a difference to some degree, you know?
I could agree with that. But like Reggie didn't come from games, right?
No.
He came from
he was a businessman.
Business.
Yep. Yeah. But again, I think
he did a good job.
I think the difference there is, again, though, he plays video games, right? Like if you know, I know you read his book as well, right? There's a whole chapter of while he was working at, I think it was at Pizza Hut or whatever. It was like he was staying up every night playing The Legend of Zelda, right? And then it was like that was a thing that he had always been drawn to, and he loved playing games. And I think, you know, I think being somebody who actually is involved, you know, like, and I think that applies in any capacity, right? Like if you're in movies, right? Like I'd want the person who's leading the film company to love film and want the goal of the company to be to make exciting, innovative art that also makes money, right? Like I get it. It's profit has to, you know, we live in a capitalistic society. Businesses need revenue. So you need people like Reggie to some degree to keep the lights on. But I think if they are somebody who cares about the product more and the audience and the relationship that you build with your customer base over generations, I think that does make a difference, right? Because you've been on the other side of that. You have that attachment to Zelda. So yeah, you want it to sell well because that's your job, but also like you want it to be a good game because you are excited to play it. I think that matters.
Yeah, I do too. What do you think about someone becoming president of a company who likes scouting for new and disruptive technologies, including the blockchain and Web 3.0? Do you think they would be a really good fit for a gaming company?
I gotta say, I don't think that they would be a good fit as the head of a gaming company, and I think that is exactly why President Yosuke Matsuda is going to be replaced at One Square Enix. Not particularly surprising there, I think, given some of their recent challenges.
I don't think that is the case though, because like if you look at his replacement, Takashi Kiru, he's the one that was focused on scamming of new and disruptive technologies and creating a
No!
blockchain or
Oh
Web 3.0.
no!
Yeah, that's what he originally came from.
Oh no!
He came from the Dentsu Innovation Initiative, which was an R&D organization before he joined Square Enix in 2020 as general manager of its
Mm.
corporate planning division. And it looks like none of their plans are changing. Square Enix said, as they announced the departure of, or the desired departure of Matsuda, because he's definitely being fired. They said, under the rapid change of the business environment surrounding the entertainment industry, the proposed change is intended to reshape the management team and the goal of adopting ever evolving technological innovations and maximizing the creativity of the company's group in order to deliver even greater entertainment to its customers around the world, which is very much what they were planning on doing with blockchain and NFTs and all of that bollocks that no one
Oh
cares about.
no! Oh boy! That's
So at first glance, it seemed like great, right?
yeah,
Matsuda
totally.
was all about NFTs and like let's sell off the Western studios and we'll invest all that money in the blockchain and Bitcoin and all of this stuff. And then actually it just looks like his replacement is going to do the exact same thing.
So
So
then, what's the
yeah,
motivation
it's really disappointing.
to replace him?
I
Then
think
it's
the
like,
motivation is probably related to the fact that they've had a lot of flops, a lot of bad business decisions with Luminous Productions being
yeah,
spun out on its own and then having to come back in because Forspoken was just a disaster, and
I think
they've just not been doing well.
I feel like that's even like a not a great business decision to go through the effort of spinning a studio out and then they have one failure and you're like, forget it. It's like, really? Like, you're not like restructure, like anything? Like, okay. Like, that just feels like, I don't know, maybe that's sunk cost fallacy in my mind, right? Where like I'm overestimating the value of that studio. But yeah, I
Well, the
mean,
studio was initially not even a studio, right? It was they developed a game engine. They developed the Luminous
the
engine,
Luminous
and
engine.
that was their purpose. And then they made Final Fantasy 15 with that, and then wanted to develop their own thing, wanted to do their own unique individual IP, which was what Forspoken was. And it just obviously didn't do very well. So they had 150 employees when they got merged back into Square Enix. Whether they stay as their own team and they go back to being one of the business divisions of Square Enix, or whether it gets disbanded, which would be what my guess would be for Luminous, is that it's gone. We don't see another Luminous engine game because the next Final Fantasy is not using it, and it kind of goes by the wayside. And that's the end of Luminous. That's the end of the Luminous engine. And they'll probably use Unreal moving forwards, and that'll be it.
I think that's probably true. It's like I feel like the business of developing engines is tricky, and I think for a company of Square Enix's size, like they're probably not interested in doing it anymore. I wouldn't be so. I feel like more and more people are moving to Unreal,
Yeah.
which is scary. I don't want to get to a point where Unreal is like the only engine. That's
But
obviously
it's Unreal or Unity. And like
yeah,
Unity's not been making some great decisions over there with like the purchasing of that ad company and like working with defense contracts and stuff. Like there's some dangerous stuff going on over there as well.
yeah,
It's like you've got really kind of two solutions. I mean, I know like people like IO use their own in-house engine. They're not the only ones. Obviously, Sony's
yeah,
got their own stuff.
right. Like
Like
oh my god, Horizon's engine,
Decima
the
engine you've
Decima
got, and then
engine,
you've
yeah.
got the stuff that Naughty Dog use. They use their own in-house engine. I think Nintendo used some of their own engines for some of their games as well.
But I mean, it's like
Um,
even just recently, right? Like we had the news that like Halo is going to be moving over to Unreal, right? And they had their own proprietary engine that they had been using for
yeah,
a long time, and now they're going to switch over. It's yeah,
yeah, the Red engine that was used for Cyberpunk, The Witcher, all of those games, that's now gone. The next
yeah,
Witcher will be Unreal.
that's true.
Will be Unreal Engine 5, so that's a real shame as well. CD Projekt's binned off their own engine, which
It's so
goes back decades.
And I guess there's Frostbite still at EA, right? But even that, like they're moving away from that. They had
Even they're using Unreal because they
yeah,
used Unreal in all of the Respawn games.
and the Mass Effect trilogy remaster was done in Unreal, and then the new BioWare games I believe are also being made in Unreal. Which I don't know. It's like it's tough because I think you read not press reset. It's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, and there's a lot of conversation about engines in the chapter about Dragon Age Inquisition and how so much of that game's struggle came from using a proprietary engine that had
Yeah, like shoehorning it into one that was designed for an FPS.
yeah. And like I remember I remember a direct quote being that it had like sharp edges, and it was like very like unfriendly. And then you hear similar things where it's like Halo Infinite, right? Like part of the struggle of it not being able to keep up with the roadmap that people wanted was the engine, and that there are apparently, according to a report by Jason as well, entire game modes that are like basically developed, but they just don't quite work because of challenges with the engine. And I think as much as I'm deathly afraid of video games moving towards the Hollywood model of like having these monopolies, there is with engines, there is an advantage of everyone using the same engine, right? If everyone's on Unreal, the more people that use it, the more resources there are for troubleshooting, the more your knowledge from working on one game will then apply to another one when you go to another studio. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I'm not saying that like that's what we should shoot for, but I also understand why so many of these companies, especially more independent, like middle tier, developers, publishers that are still AAA, but that are not on the size of a Sony or a Microsoft or a Nintendo. I get why they don't want to invest a ton of money in making their own engines, and then like you look at Forspoken, and like it had challenges at launch, right? Where like it didn't run super well, and like people complained about some of the visuals, and that there are like certain elements that are beautiful and then other things that look kind of rough, and I
Yeah, but then I look at say Sony's games where they have put the time and the effort and the investment in, and they've been able to license out Decima to other
yeah,
studios. And part of me wonders, was Luminous rolled out to its own company to do that, to
yeah,
develop the Luminous engine and license it out? Because I don't like one company controlling the majority of games.
no, and
And
it is that way
Epic
now.
is that. It is that way. And Tencent owns 40% of Epic Games. And so at some point, they're probably going to buy the rest of it if Tim Sweeney will sell it to them. And I would imagine that's probably his exit plan is I'm going to retire here, buy the company, and it's worth billions. And I just don't want one company controlling every single game and just being able to say, right, we're ramping up the licensing costs now that you're all hooked on Unreal, and none of you can afford it. And
Yeah.
it's like tough shit, basically, because what are you going to do? Because you don't have your own engine anymore. You're not working on anything. What's the alternative? Unity. Well, that's a different tool set.
I you know I
So
think I think the one, and you're right, that is a very serious concern, and that's exactly why you don't want to see that. But I guess what would probably happen at that point, right, is like these companies would reinvest in making engines again, I guess. You know?
yeah, but how long does that take? Like, do you start from square one again?
But I mean, like that's the problem with a lot of these engines anyway, right? The proprietary ones will be that they go for too long without being updated, whereas like Unreal gets a new version every couple years, right? Like the conversation around, and I wish I could remember the name of this engine, but the engine that they used to make Halo Infinite, like I remember Jason characterized it as being like built on code that is like a lot of it is from the 90s and the early aughts, and it's like okay, right? Like that's probably antiquated. Like they probably needed a 2.0 of that, And I guess that would be the thing. Would be, you either go to one of the other very limited number of games in town, or you bite the bullet, you pay the increased licensing costs, and then you make your own engine so you don't have to deal with it again. You know?
Yeah. I do wonder if at some point Microsoft tries this though, and they go, right, let's make our own engine that goes across the board. They own Bethesda. They could roll out Creation and say, right, let's use this for our open world titles because it's fit for it. looks like it's had a huge boost and a huge update for Starfield, and potentially that could be used by Obsidian to build their next game. Like, let's make Avowed 2, because I'm sure Avowed is too far down the line to switch engines. Let's make Avowed 2 in creation, and we can save on licensing costs. We don't have to pay
Outer
Epic
Worlds
Games
3.
anymore. Yeah, Outer Worlds 3. Let's move that to the creation engine too, and let's have everything in like one engine that we control, which was EA's plan, right? That's why they wanted Frostbite. It was going to be shared across all
It was
their
a good
studios.
idea in theory. It was just not the right engine for it. I think they should have built a new engine from the ground up with that intention rather than be like, let's shoehorn our third-person open-world action adventure RPG game into a first-person shooter, tool set. Like, I remember when they announced it, it sounded like, oh, this is actually a pretty good idea, right? You share resources, like that's how you build, the library that Unreal has, and that's why it's so useful. And it's like you wish, right? Like you'd wish that everybody would have that thought, but I guess it's the thing of like investing in that technology and then over relying on it to the point where it's antiquated, and then it is like an uphill battle of like, well, what do we do? Do we invest another, huge chunk of money to make another iteration of this engine? Where does that money come from? Whereas like obviously for Epic it's easy, right? Like that was a huge part of their business model forever, and then now like they print money with Fortnite, and like they can invest dozens of,
And then they dog food the hell out of their engine with Fortnite, because they're using it they're using Unreal to build Fortnite, so they can try out Nanite and Lumen and use that as their kind of test ground and figure out what challenges they've got with their own internal developers. And Valve was doing that for a while with Source and building out their own games, but they
God, I would
seemingly stopped
love
making games for a while. But
would
we need like a
love-
Source 3.
That would be awesome. And like I think that's the thing. That will be the solution, right? There will come a time probably where Epic is so dominant that another company like Valve is like, it's time for us to come up with a new alternative for people again, I think. And
I hope so.
Maybe that's wishful
I'd
thinking.
love to see that.
But I feel like that is the natural reality. Is I think right now, especially during this recession, we'll see a lot of people probably shift towards Unreal because it's cheap and it's easy to use and everybody knows how to use it. And while there's a talent drain right now in the industry, you want people to be able to come in and slot into the project as easily as possible. It makes sense. And I bet a couple of years from now, right, when hopefully things turn around and, we're back in a point where there's more money flowing in the industry, maybe that'll change and it'll decentralize around it again. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive on this one. And we will hit that point sooner than later, but I don't know. I guess there's also an argument to be made that even if they did become a monopoly, do they want to increase the licenses to the point where they're not, or is it just profitable enough to be the only game in town? Because like you think about Adobe, right, and how they were a de facto thing for a long time, and now there's all these competitors coming up, and they have to buy them up.
Yeah, but Adobe
and they
became
have
complacent.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like they weren't innovating on what they had. They were just like, oh, we're the standard. We don't need to do anything. It feels like Epic still does innovate, still push the technology forward.
And I think that's the thing. As long as they continue to do that, and if they don't, like, jack up licenses and everything, they'll make money hand over fist. They don't need to be exploitive if they are truly the best solution, That's why everybody will move over, because it's cheaper and it's easier and it's better. Like, and I'm, again, never trust a corporation. I'm not saying that they wouldn't do that. It would be extremely logical for them to do that once they are on top. But I don't know. It's a complex situation, and you hope it doesn't come to that, I guess is the bottom line here. But it is a shame.
I hope so.
It is a shame to see this engine feel like it's probably going to get shuttered before it ever really had a chance.
But can you imagine the amount they're going to make? Like Unreal Engine 5, once you've made $1 million, you have to pay 5% of gross revenues to Epic for all of your games. Like, that is so much money if everyone shifts to Unreal.
And that's the thing, right? Is like, do you rock that boat, or do you just keep converting more
just
and
keep
more?
Going, yeah. It's like, let's keep investing some of this cash and pocketing the rest. And,
you know what I mean? Like, rather, because then the strategy, the business strategy there is not to corner a market and exploit it. It's to corner a market and then keep cornering it, right? And just make it so that, like, because there are new studios all the time, right? There's constantly new people you can sell your technology to. And if it becomes de facto, then it's like
the Android model, right? It's
yeah,
like
exactly.
We've became the dominant mobile operating system, and everyone that makes a phone that's not Apple, well, they're chucking Android on it. So
and they didn't
we just keep getting money.
Yeah, and they didn't do that and then like make it cost prohibitive for you to license Android, right? They tried to. It's like, no, everyone should just use it. You can, you're not using. Yeah, use it here. It's free. Use it. Take it. $3.
It's free, but then if you want the Google stuff, you've got to pay them.
Yeah,
which is the stuff you really want, because you want the Google Store, you want Gmail on there. People that buy an Android phone, they expect to be able to use Google stuff with it. They become used to it.
Yeah, and then you pay for it, and it's worth the exchange for both parties. And like, if Epic can do that with this and make it where it's just like, yeah, like, I mean, everyone uses Unreal, and any game that's a moderate success, we see a couple $1 million just for licensing out a thing we were gonna make anyway.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with them.
It's crazy, man.
I do think it's a real shame that we're seeing the death of yet another engine. Final Fantasy 15 seemed to look great, right? And I just don't know what happened when it came to Forspoken, and it just really just didn't live up to expectations visually, performance-wise. Just people didn't like the game.
I feel like it just had a lot of problems, and it's like, despite that, it did have redeeming qualities. I think even people who are critical of it, like, there were things about it people thought were cool, and it's a shame.
I know, and I feel like they probably could have fixed a lot of it with a sequel, in the same way that Octopath Traveler 2 seemingly has fixed all of the issues that everyone had with Octopath Traveler.
Yeah.
So much so Jason Schreier was calling it like the Elden Ring of JRPGs in his newsletter.
Well, again, you think about stuff like the jump from like Assassin's Creed to Assassin's Creed 2, like, it happens a lot. And I'm not saying that maybe Forspoken is like, that has to, you make a Forspoken 2, maybe not, but maybe you just let them get another at bat, bring on some more talent that's a little more experienced, and I don't know. But
well, they got the DLC that's coming out this summer. Maybe that can fix a bunch of problems, but I feel like it's too late at this point. The decision's been made. Yeah.
Oh well. R.I.P. C'est la vie. So that's not the the end of the headlines though from Square this past week. On the you alluded to this part earlier. On the keeping the Final Fantasy train rolling. Final Fantasy 16 made some headlines this month because they're basically the head of the studio came out to say, first of all, I would be happy if you could play the PS5 version, which I made with the thought of being the best game in the world. If the PC version comes out in half a year, I can quit the company. Laughs. Please don't say I won't buy the PS5 version because the PC version will be released in half a year. And essentially that was part of a broader conversation where, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, we don't start working on the PC version until the PS5 version ships. So, like, it's not coming in 6 months. It's coming, down the line. And, I mean, that's consistent. That's exactly what happened with Final Fantasy 15. I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, that they had the 6-month exclusivity with Sony.
Yeah.
Like, they could have just said, well, we'll give you 12 months. Just give
right? Like, why not?
And then, like, yeah, sure. Then we'll just carry on with the PC version. He made another remark, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. This guy, like Yoshida, is just classic. I don't know how he gets away with making these remarks. He said, Final Fantasy 16 won't be delayed unless a meteor falls on Japan. And
he's
like, what?
He's such a wacky dude. So I want to clarify something I said earlier. I believe I said that with Final Fantasy 15, I think I said earlier that it came to PlayStation and then Xbox. It was actually released on both of them, it seems, on November 29th. But then it came to Windows 2 years later, March 6th, 2018.
Yeah, and it seems to have a real stronghold of fans over there now.
Yeah, it's been very successful on PC. And I think the same thing happened. It was a similar timeline between it and the Final Fantasy VII remake. because I think that was
Yeah, that one
also
came to Epic for a while, didn't it? And then it eventually came to Steam. I think that was actually 12 months after, and I think the people presumed they had 12 months exclusivity with Sony for that one.
what I'm seeing here is April 10th, 2020 was PS4, came out a year later on PS5, and then it came to Windows later that same year, December 16th.
So they
Yeah.
were probably working on the PC version alongside the PS5 version.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the idea of it coming anywhere from one or so years later, I think that's the precedent they've established, Um, and it's funny because like I know this definitely like was a bit controversial, but I kind of appreciate the transparency here. Like I would rather a studio do that because I think there's so many examples of AAA games that do come out on PC and console day and date, and one version doesn't work, right? Like you think of CD Projekt and Cyberpunk, like PC version was great, console version was busted. You think
You
of
often see it the other way around as well, where
I was about to say,
where the console version is great and the PC version's a shit port
yep.
with like micro stutters and all sorts of sliders that don't work in the settings.
That was Wolong Dynasty that just came out from Team Ninja, right? Yeah, they had that problem where the PC was like the PC community was like, great, another busted PC version, like cool. Can't wait for it to be fixed in 6 months so I can actually play it.
Yeah, it's got 5 out of 10 on Steam at the moment.
Yeah, and it's like that sucks, right? Like don't push it out day and date if it's not going to be good. Like I'd rather them take the time and have it launch well. And I mean the other Final Fantasy games that we saw come to PC, right? The two we just talked about. My memory of those launches is that they were solid.
Yeah, 14 was not though, right? Wasn't that the one that they like backtracked and
Yeah, but then they made good on it though, right? That the community around that game is insane. Like the people that love that game love that game. So
oh yeah, I know a bunch of people that just binned off World of Warcraft and shifted over to play that instead.
Yeah, so they made good on it at least. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm really excited for Final Fantasy 16. I think it's really going to be one to look out for me later this year at least. So I'm super excited about it, and I hope that when it does inevitably come to PC, that it's as good as it can be, right? And like if they're going to take their time with that, then cool. But I wonder if the 6 months exclusivity is it's going to come to Xbox then. I bet you it's 6 months and then that comes to Game Pass.
That would be wild considering 7 remakes not even come to, like the first part's not come to Xbox and seemingly is never going to come to Xbox.
That's actually exclusive, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that came to PC, but it never came to Xbox.
And like you remember though, that was like
Core that came over, but remake never did.
That was like revealed at a state of play and everything too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but wasn't part 2 of 7 remake, and it seems like it's only got 6 months exclusivity. Whether that's a console exclusivity and it's coming to PC or what, I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably what they mean. I don't know though. It's interesting. I don't know. I guess I didn't think about that. Maybe Final Fantasy 16 is also going to be PlayStation exclusive in that way.
Yeah.
But no, it's only 6 months, so then why not? No, it's got to be coming to Xbox, right? It's got to be.
Unless it's 6 months, we want it on our platform for 6 months, and then you can do the PC release or put it on cloud services, or maybe whatever. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in that court case where Sony's got to reveal how much they're paying to lock down everything.
God, I can't wait. I can't wait to find out what that number is.
Yeah, it's gotta be juicy.
For sure. Speaking of juicy, this is a story that I feel like we may have talked about it when it like very first happened, but we've kind of with developing stories like this, I like to kind of let them happen. But big update this week while we're already talking about Square, so let's chat about it. Sonic the Hedgehog's co-creator Yuji Naka has admitted now to insider trading while he was working at Square Enix. So this obviously made the headlines like late last year when this initially got dusted up, but now we're kind of like in the throes of the actual case itself, and it seems he's going to plead guilty.
Yeah, now he's well and truly fucked is what he is, because he's pleaded guilty for illegally trading in 2 counts, right? For Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest.
Yeah, right. It was. I think the Dragon Quest thing was the first thing we heard about last year, and I think then the Final Fantasy, that's like a newer piece of information, if memory serves me. But it's been a bit. But yeah, so during his first trial with the Tokyo District Court this week, he admitted to the specific, crime is violating Japan's Financial Instruments and Exchange Act for trading $1 million in stocks while he was an employee. So pretty significant amount of money at that. And this is a translation of his statement here. He said, "There's no doubt that I knew the facts about the game before it was made public and bought the stock." So very cut and dry on that.
Yeah, it's not ideal, right? And I would imagine there's a bit of a plea deal going on here. I don't know how Japan's legal system works, if it's the same as the US or the UK is, where you can kind of make a deal, say you plead guilty, and they'll give you like a lighter sentence kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or if he's doing it because the evidence has kind of got him banged to rights, and it's just like, yep, I did purchase 10,000 shares prior to announcing a game, like that's pretty clear, cut and dry insider trading. Like you had inside information that a game was about to be announced, and you knew it was going to be a hot property, and so you then bought shitloads of shares in the company that was making it. Not good.
Yeah, it's funny too, because obviously a lot of drama around him lately, right? Because just to give you a quick rundown, if you don't remember the details, right? He was arrested twice. The first was, as you said, with Dragon Quest, with it says prior to developer aiming going public with Dragon Quest tact, and for purchasing $1 million in shares in A-Team Entertainment prior to the studio going public with Square Enix mobile battle royale game Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier. And he was arrested along with Tatsuke Sasaki, I believe is how you'd say that. Apologies if not. Who's another former Square Enix employee who had worked on the Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy series. So the two of them got in trouble, and it's funny because that was not the only controversy between him and Square Enix, right? There was he released Balan Wonderland was that last year or 2 years ago now?
Balan Wonderworld, it got renamed, remember?
Wonderworld, sure.
But I think it was last year, and it was a mega flop.
Huge flop.
Another mega flop for Square. That's a surprise.
And then he sued them for wrongful termination for being let go 6 months before the game was even released. So
maybe that's what they meant from their statement by saying that they had done disciplinary action against a former employee. But surely if you knew insider trading was happening at your company and it was a former employee, rather than just firing him, you should have reported it to the police.
Right. And I think that is the interesting wrinkle, was he let go because of this and they thought that the smoke was going to come and they wanted to fire him?
Maybe that leads to the president being replaced. Maybe he had knowledge of this happening. Who knows?
It's obviously all speculation, right? But
yes, please don't sue us.
Sure. Hey, we're just commentators, right? We're saying something that might have happened,
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because that timeline is fairly suspect. They could be totally unrelated, right? He could have been let go because the game was shit and they knew it was gonna flop and they were unsatisfied and they didn't want to support his next project, right? But I don't know. It's like it does make you think. Is this a situation where that was maybe a smokescreen for them to fire him because of this actual thing that they were trying to get ahead of and not have on their doorstep, right? And be able to have that plausible deniability of, oh, well, we weren't involved and we got rid of him and we took disciplinary action. And okay.
Yeah, in any case, it's not great, and it's yet another piece of bad news or bad press hitting Square Enix. It seems like they just cannot catch a break lately. I mean, Octopath Traveler 2 has obviously done critically well for them. How well that's done in terms of sales, I think, is yet to be seen. But yeah, they're not doing great over there at the moment.
Yeah,
Final Fantasy seems to be kind of the only feather they've got in their cap right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I by all accounts, I think 16 will probably deliver, but it feels like they're in a really precarious position, And I
Yeah.
know we've talked a lot about the idea of them like potentially getting sold, or I guess I should say getting acquired, at some point. And
Is anyone really going to want to acquire Square as a company or just the IP to their games at this point?
I mean,
Because it
that's the
just
thing
feels
though.
like
I think
you
the Final Fantasy team is still good, right? Like the team that works on Final Fantasy 14 is the same team that's doing Final Fantasy 16. That's a solid studio. They have the team that does, the remake stuff. That's been solid. Like, I think that there's if somebody did acquire Final Fantasy, if somebody did acquire Square Enix, that would be the primary motivator. And there is other IP they have that's valuable. But I think they'd clean house, probably. Yeah, to your point, I think they'd probably fire a lot of people and keep the 3 or 4 teams that are there that are making games that are
Well,
quality.
you want Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Kingdom Hearts, probably the 3 big ones that you want. And then you get the smaller titles like the Octopath Travelers and
Like
the
Octopath is
Project
now a thriving
Triangle.
IP, I would say, right? Like Bravely Default is still does well, they have other stuff, like you said, it's smaller, but
Yeah, it's not enough for you to buy them
no.
for those smaller games. You buy it for Final Fantasy, and I could easily see them going down like a Konami route where they're just like, okay, Square as a company is no longer going to be making video games. We're going to be making like an NFTs or whatever. But we're going to spin out all of our IPs and we're going to let other people make them, or we're going to sell them off because they've sold off all their Western ones. And it's really strange because they had that it was like it wasn't planned. They had their tie-in with Tomb Raider in their Pressure Wash or Power Wash Simulator game that they publish. It was like a crossover with one of their own IPs, but they don't even own Tomb Raider anymore.
Yeah, it's gone now.
So it was like, it's like, what? And
But
they've just done another one with Final Fantasy, which seems to be
yeah.
really great, and it's got like a story mode and stuff, but it's just like
But
bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
I think that's part of it though. I think it is that they want to get acquired. I think they want to sell the company. And I think that when you looked at those Western studios, we talked about this when they got sold. Like they made games that were critically acclaimed, but they never sold well.
Hmm.
And they had a couple missteps, in games that like undersold, even if they were well received, and a couple games that were not well received, and they didn't come together the way that they had planned. And I think all that together, right? It was one of those things where if you're trying to clean house and make yourself look more attractive, right? Like I think that was the primary motivator there, is just that like these things stick out in our portfolio. Not to mention, we've talked a lot about the idea of like Sony acquiring them. I like, is that stuff
Well, I
that,
think Sony just want the IP and the studio, and then like the rest of it, it's like, see you later. We dissolve all that. We just have the talent. I think that's probably the only way you can go. And some of their stuff, like we've mentioned, like Bravely Default, I don't think they even own it. It was published by Nintendo in the West. It's developed by a company called Silicon Studio. Seems like Square only published it in Japan. Same with
I think,
Bravely
do they not
Default 2.
own Silicon Studio though? I'm pretty sure Bravely Default is.
No, Silicon Studio is a public company, so unless they own that IP, I don't know. It seems like Silicon Studio is a publicly trading company in Japan, and they've got 3 products, which is Bravely Default, Bravely Second, and 3D Dot Game Heroes.
Okay. So maybe not then, but I don't know. My understanding is that they own the IP.
Quite possibly, and if that's the case, this may be like the argument for selling off the IP, right? Nintendo, do you want the Bravely Default franchise, and we'll sell Final Fantasy to Sony, and Microsoft can have Dragon Quest, and you just sell the games rather than selling
I
yourself. You
guess,
sell
yeah.
the IP that you've got, which is what they were basically doing with the Western studios. It's people really want it, so they can buy Tomb Raider and do
Yeah.
the movie
I
tie-in
just
with
don't
Amazon.
I don't know, maybe. I just don't see them doing that with those IP. I think it's different with the Western stuff, because the Western stuff were not IPs that they incubated. They were things that they acquired, and the idea of you acquiring something and then selling it because it doesn't fit your portfolio anymore, to me, makes more sense than the idea of like, let's sell off the only thing that our company is, right? Like,
Yeah, the thing we're known for.
yeah,
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, the Square Enix brand is Final Fantasy. And then the assorted other lesser JRPGs that they also own, and not even necessarily lesser in quality, but in notoriety, right?
What even happens with some of their other stuff these days? Like the Life is Strange series. Like, are they even going to continue with that?
Yeah.
Was that done?
No, I'm sure they will. They didn't sell off Deck 9. They still own the IP. Again, you know why? Life is Strange is profitable. Tomb Raider was not. That's why we won't get more, from them. Is that they tried to make it a thing for years, and it wasn't a thing. Or at least it wasn't enough of a thing. And I think that's
They don't own Deck 9.
They don't own Deck 9. Okay. I know they definitely
a company called Idle Minds LLC. It's a private company. They might own the Final Fantasy. Oh, not Final Fantasy. The Life is Strange IP.
They definitely do. I know that because that was why Don't Nod moved on from it, right? Like, if you'll recall, a couple years ago, that was the story, right? After Life is Strange 2, they basically they announced that they were going to no longer work with publishers. They took a minor investment from Tencent, and then their goal was to just self-publish all of their games from then on. But yeah, so I guess Deck 9 is just the studio that they're outsourcing it to, because they got involved with the prequel during the there was like a period where they wanted to follow up on the success of Life is Strange, and Don't Nod wanted more time to do something else.
Because Deck 9's working on the Expanse game with Telltale at the moment. Not with Square.
No, yeah. They said that they're not doing that anymore. So yeah, it's
interesting. I'm interested to see what happens with Square. I think you probably could be right about an acquisition, and just like aligning themselves for it. And who knows what all of the other smoke's about, like the insider trading, the president leaving, the Luminous Productions failing. It's just, it's not very good look from the outside.
No, it's funny because like we've been talking about the struggles with Ubisoft, and I feel like it's like similar, where it's like they're this studio where it's like they have one or two things that like prop up the rest of it. But I think they're in a much better position because they still make games that are good, that are not Final Fantasy, right? Octopath obviously was just a big success. So I think they have a farm of talent that is definitely, still good. I think like there's been bad business decisions. There've been a few, public missteps, but I think when you release as many games as Square does, like they're not all going to be bangers, I guess, right? Like companies have failures. That happens. That doesn't mean that they're, up shit's creek, but I think with the market and the like reality we're in now with this acquisition happy, era, I wouldn't be surprised to see them get gobbled up by somebody bigger, or maybe to do what they did to become Square Enix in the first place, right? Square and Enix used to be two independent studios, and they came together to form Square Enix. Maybe that could happen. Maybe they could merge with a Sega or a Capcom or something like that, and that's the way that these mid-sized companies weather the storm, right? And they between the strength of a Final Fantasy and a Monster Hunter and whatever, right? A Persona, a Sonic the Hedgehog, like you're able to remain independent and carve out a niche where you have enough hits that it doesn't matter, but something's got to happen. I think for the idea that they're going to continue as they are, without some major changes to how they're operating, I think just seems unlikely.
Agreed.
Well, if you guys want to write in and let us know what you think about everything going on at Square Enix, or your excitement for IO Interactive's new game, or whatever else we talked, Xbox Series S, right? Talked about a lot of stuff today, man. Lots of news. The news hits keep coming this week. Definitely make sure you write into the show because we'd love to hear from you. There's a bunch of ways you can get involved. Join the Discord where the conversation keeps rolling between episodes. Write into us at questions@flipscreen.games. However you choose to get involved, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to read your question on the next episode of the show. So come hang out. Come join us. Flipscreen.games. That's the link. However you choose to get involved, we appreciate you tuning in to this week's episode of the show. And for the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.